right, welcome to the third period of episode 6 of the Red Lawn podcast. We are going to be talking to our MMA and UFC insiders, the Ball brothers. So we've got Blake and Shane Ball with us on the line. So welcome to you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Maybe Blake, we'll start with you. Tell us about your history with fighting and what you have done in the past and what you enjoy watching, and just a little bit about what yourselves and that.
Yeah, I've been watching the UFC since I was probably about 15 years old. And then the last about 3.5 years, I've been training in kickboxing, Muay Thai, boxing. And I more so do it recreationally. And sometimes I'll corner Shane for emotional support. Not that he needs it or because he's scared. I just really don't want him to kill the other guy. So that's kind of my background in the sport.
Yeah, and my background kind of similar to Blake. Been a huge MMA fan since about 2007. Started training myself kind of recreationally to get into shape about 3.5 years ago. And that kind of led into one thing to the other. And then I actually started fighting. And then last year I fought in Canada National Amateur Muay Thai Championship, which I ended up winning. And that's...
He almost killed a guy.
What's that?
I said he almost killed a guy.
It was pretty quick and easy.
Nice.
That's the extent. And hopefully, I have another one coming up here by the end of this year, COVID permitting. But yeah, I don't do MMA because it's just too many different things going on. I do train some wrestling with our fight team because we have some MMA fighters inside of our gym, which is primarily focused around striking. So I do have some wrestling chops, but by no means is it at the same level of my striking, but just an overall fight fan.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. Well, thanks for the intro, guys. Now, it was a busy month in July for UFC fight cards. Now, back in early July, UFC 251 went on, and that was kind of the first one of July. Can you kind of give us the rundown, Shane, on what happened in that card and maybe some highlights or surprises?
Yeah, so UFC 251 was very, very interesting, primarily because our welterweight champion, Kamaru Usman, was lined up to fight his actual training partner in Gilbert Burns, who had a very impressive performance under number 3 contender and former champ Tyrone Woodley. So they gave Gilbert Burns the opportunity to fight his teammate, Kamaru Usman. And then Gilbert Burns ended up testing positive for COVID, and he got pulled from the fight. And then longtime rival, although they've never fought before, they've had a lot of personal, quote unquote, beef with Jorge Masvidal, Gamebred Masvidal, ended up taking the fight on 6 days' notice, flying from Miami, Florida to Yas Island off the United Arab Emirates and cutting 26 pounds in 6 days to make weight to fight Kamaru Usman for the welterweight championship, which ended up favoring Kamaru Usman, but a very, very gutsy play and definitely raised the stock of Jorge Masvidal coming from number 3 or number 4 in the rankings up to a title shot contender or a contention for the title shot. And that was co-mained by Alexander Volkanovski v. Max Holloway for their second fight back-to-back. Holloway being the previous champ, Volkanovski stripping of him of his championship, and then they were rematching for it. An incredibly close fight. You truly could have put it either way, but in my opinion, if you want to be the champ, you got to beat the champ. And I don't think Holloway did enough in the second fight to solidify that. Those were the two big fights on UFC 251.
Yeah, I agree with Shane on that too. But this fight in particular was probably one of the biggest heat back for the decision. Most people had Max Holloway winning, and there was a lot of turmoil after this fight, let me tell you that. But I also agree with Shane. If you want to beat the champ, you got to beat him decisively. You can't just kind of scrape away with a win.
Yeah, that one, round by round, they were just the first two rounds, Max Holloway absolutely dominated the champion Alexander Volkanovski. But then Volkanovski, like a true champ does, got back in the fight in rounds 3, 4, 5, and made each of those rounds really, really close. Actually, 4 and 5 were definitely to him, but that third round was brutally close. And if you are a judge and there is a championship belt on the line, you got to just give a slight favor when on those tight rounds to the champion.
Yeah. You mentioned the one fighter that got COVID. What has the UFC been doing kind of in terms of their shift in how they're putting on fights during COVID?
Yes, so they were the only major sporting event that continued during the lockdown. So one of the very first things that they did was they moved their fights that were scheduled worldwide all over the world. They moved them onto the Army base in Fort Lauderdale and isolated all the fighters because there was still, I don't think it was full lockdown at that point, but definitely all sports had canceled by that point. Mm-hmm. And then once they realized that they were in full isolation, Dana White made a huge announcement that he was going to go and put all these fights onto a fight island. He was going to arrange an island somewhere in the world so that foreign fighters would have the opportunity to fight as well on the international scale. But in the meantime, while he was arranging the island, he moved the fights for American fighters to the UFC Apex Center in Nevada, and they held fights there. And that was a very interesting time because the Apex Center is a lot smaller than a traditional stadium. So the ring itself, or the cage, the octagon, is about 10 feet smaller. Oh, and so it made for tight quarter fights. There was a lot more knockouts because there's less room to move. And if you're not used to that, that's a huge adjustment to make. And then they moved the fights to Yas Island off the coast of United Arab Emirates. And they built basically a bubble, a lot what you're seeing with the NHL right now. And they fly fighters there. I think they do something like 8 to 10 COVID tests per person involved. So that could go from sound guys to the setup guys to the audio guys to the fighters themselves to the doctors to the ring announcer. They test them 8 or 10 times each before.
Even the ring girls get tested 10 times.
Yeah, even before the fight even starts. So for UFC 251, I think they said they did almost 9,000 tests for that one event.
Wow.
Yeah, Dana White did a big power move, and he just got it done.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Now, in terms of the original fight that you said where there was a fight between partners, does that happen very often?
No, not very common at all. Actually, off the top of my head, Blake, can you think of any other one where it was that for a title fight? Blake, can you think of anything?
I can't really think of anything, but usually, I know there's been a few. What they'll do is they're usually bigger gyms, so they'll just separate the training times between the two guys, so they don't have to cross each other's paths during the camp.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened on a smaller scale, probably where it wasn't a title fight, and it would just because of the way the rankings tie up. Sometimes it just so happens that if you're both in one gym, you do have to fight each other to advance in the rankings. I think that's happened more than enough times, but I don't think it's happened where it's been for a title fight.
Yeah, I've never heard of it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, I'll pass it off to Blake.
Yeah, so thanks for the rundown for the UFC 251. There was also the UFC Fight Night 172 in the past August.
Yes. And that's the great thing about Yas Island. They were able to do, I think they did, I'm not even exactly sure, but they were doing fights on Wednesday nights and Saturday nights for, I think, 4 weeks straight. So you're getting 2 fight cards that were usually pretty stacked and full with, full fight cards. And so there was a lot of fights happening. But UFC Fight Night 172, headlined by Calvin Kattar and Dan Ige. That was a tremendous fight. won by Calvin Kattar, and I will already put a star by Calvin Kattar's name. This guy is absolutely someone to watch. There's already talks about him fighting Max Holloway, who just fought Alexander Volkanovski at 251, and he's the former champion, to raise his stock into title contention. Now, there's something interesting that just happened. Another fight was lined up for a contender fight for that 145-pound division with Zabit Matt, like, how do you say that name?
Yeah, right.
He's just known as Zabit because no one can say his last name. He's from Dagestan. And he was meant to fight Yair Rodriguez, and Rodriguez just pulled out due to injury. So there's talk now that Kattar has offered to step in, and that's this weekend coming up. On 3 days' notice, he's offering to step up to fight Zabit, who's a very serious fighter. And they've already fought, actually. Calvin Kattar and Zabit have already fought, where Zabit ended up winning that fight, but Kattar really took that third round. It wasn't a five-round fight, and Kattar really took that third round to Zabit, and had it gone on, I truly think he would have finished Zabit in the fourth round, but saved by the bell. So if they rematch, that would be a great fight. So that was the headline of 172. There was a couple notable fights on that card as well. Hamzat Chimaev versus John Phillips. Chimaev coming out of Sweden via Chechnya. A lot of comparisons of this guy have been made to the lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. Very similar style, very similar aggressive, smothering wrestling style, ground and pound. But he took that fight against John Phillips, and then he took another short notice fight on 10 days after that fight to fight an upcomer prospect, Reese McKee, and he beat him on 10 days notice in two different, not 10 days notice, 10 days apart. On 10
he didn't
days.
just beat them. He beat them decisively. I mean, the guy is an absolute steamroller. The guy comes in and finishes it in seconds. It's insane.
Yeah, he outstruck those two opponents 186 strikes to 2 combined between those two fights. So serious eyes are on Hamzat Chimaev. That was his first 2 fights in the UFC. They were 10 days apart, and I think if you don't know that name now, we're going to know, everyone in the world that watches, that is even remotely interested in fighting, is going to hear that name in a year for sure.
Absolutely. July 18th, UFC Fight Night, Figueiredo versus Benavidez, number 2. Figueiredo and Benavidez were the headliner, and they're in the flyweight class. Can you talk to us a little bit about that main event?
Yeah, the flyweight class has been in a bit of shambles since the former champion Henry Cejudo, also the double champion because he's also the champion of the bantamweight division.
Also the cringe king.
King of cringe. He left that division to pursue the bantamweight division. He won the belt in the bantamweight division and then formally retired or informally retired. So Benavidez and Figueiredo, they squared off for their first fight for the belt. Figueiredo missed weight, which automatically scraps him for a belt. They still agreed to fight, but if he had won that fight, he wouldn't have got the belt. It would just be for winning for his record. If Benavidez had won that fight, he would have won the belt. So Figueiredo and Benavidez ended up in that first fight clashing heads, like accidentally, really bad, and it split Benavidez right in his line of vision. And then Figueiredo ended up finishing him in that fight and winning that fight. And then a couple months later, they decided to rematch for the belt again. And then Figueiredo came out and absolutely, I don't think I've ever seen a bigger one-sided title weight fight ever in my life. He absolutely demolished Benavidez. I think a lot of people thought he threw that headbutt in that first fight in with intention and on purpose, and then a lot of people were pointing fingers saying, well, he's not a true flyweight because he missed weight and all these things. So he comes in, he makes weight, and he makes a huge statement by trying, I think, 4 submission attempts in the first round and 3 knockdowns. It was a very, very, very decisive win. He ended up winning by submission as well. Incredible fight.
Yeah, sounds like it only went 1 round. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't actually. I don't know if it made it to the second. I think
No,
it made
round one.
What's that?
It was round one that it stopped.
Was it? Okay, yeah.
Craziness. All right,
Yeah,
you're listening to the Red Line podcast. We have our MMA and UFC insiders, Blake and Shane Ball. Blake, UFC Fight Night 174.
UFC Fight Night 174. Robert Whittaker versus Darren Till. The Gorilla versus Whittaker. And it was a good fight. I really liked it. The fans really liked it. It was very technical. Lots of fakes. Robert Whittaker ended up taking the W, which is putting him back in line to get his championship belt back. He lost it to Israel Adesanya not too long ago. And then you had Mauricio Rua versus Antonio Nogueira, and they fought how many times, Shane?
That was their third fight. That was their third fight.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like the battle of the legends. Imagine for our Canadian listeners, Wayne Gretzky playing against Bobby Orr or something. It's like, but it was a good fight. And then you had Verdum versus Gustafsson, and Verdum ended up pulling a big upset. Everyone thought Gustafsson was going to win, just his boxing super crisp. But Verdum is an absolute assassin on the ground. Yep. And ended up catching Gustafsson with the armbar within the first round. So it was a really good card. Lots of unexpected things happened in there.
That card was one of the most stacked non-pay-per-view cards I've ever seen.
Yeah, there's a lot of fights on the main card.
There was oh man, I think it took about 6 hours or so to get through the whole thing. Yeah, the undercard was really long as well. And by the way, on the undercard, I'm going to bring out a big name, a big Alberta, Canada, Alberta boy. Shout out to Tanner Bozer, the bulldozer Bozer from Edmonton, Alberta, going in with an insanely impressive performance against a huge prospect in that heavyweight division in Rafael Pessoa, knocking him out in the second round, decisive, and in that first round being very decisive, very technical. He's a smaller heavyweight, but he moves really, 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 really well. And he just got another fight booked with the legendary, why is it escaping me off the top of my head? Blake, what's his name? Arlovsky.
Arlovsky, yeah, great.
Yeah, so now if he wins that fight, he'll propel into the top, I don't know, probably top 7 in the heavyweight division.
Alberta on the map.
Yeah, he's got the best mullet in the game.
Oh
yeah, it's a beauty.
Well, that's good to see some Canadian blood getting some attention in the UFC world.
Oh yeah, and we got a couple more coming up.
Love it. Awesome. Last fight that's happened August 1st. We had UFC Fight Night, Brunson versus Shabazian.
Yes.
Can you give us the rundown on that fight?
Yes. So a lot of people, Edmund Shabazian, aiming to be the youngest champion ever in UFC history. He's only 22 years old, and he was 12-0 going into this fight. He is the former training partner of Ronda Rousey. He was training with Ronda Rousey when he was 12 years old, and or even younger. But he became known for training with her when he was about 12 years old, and entered the UFC a couple years ago via Dana White Contender Series, and has been extremely impressive. So everybody was on the Edmund Shabazian hype train. He was undoubtedly supposed to win against Derek Brunson, propelling him into another contender fight right away, and then hopefully fighting for the belt to secure the youngest champion in the UFC history, to beat John Jones, the current light heavyweight champion. However, that hype train got derailed by Derek Brunson with a third round knockout. An incredible, so many people had written Derek Brunson off. They completely overlooked him, forgetting that he trains with some of the most elite people on the planet. He had a underwhelming performance against the current champion of Israel Adesanya. That Adesanya put him out really easy and really quickly. And so I think a lot of people saw similarities in Shabazian to Adesanya and thought that the same outcome would happen. But Brunson had a very, very veteran game plan and put Edmund out in the third round, which was very impressive.
All right. So coming up in August, we have a couple more fights here. We have UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Olnick, and we have UFC 252. What should we keep an eye out for here coming up in August, guys?
Yeah, UFC 252, kind of one of the biggest fights of the month is Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier, and this is their trilogy fight. DC, Daniel Cormier winning the first one, Stipe winning the second one, and this is going to be one of the tough fights to call. I actually don't know who I think is going to win. If I was going to guess, I'd probably lean more towards Daniel Cormier personally. But it could go either way, and it's an absolute awesome fight. I mean, you got two of the best heavyweights of all time, really, fighting this month.
Yeah, to touch onto that a little bit, heavyweights nowadays. Well, back in the day when the UFC started, everyone wanted to watch the heavyweights because you were sure someone was to go to sleep. Over the years, that heavyweight division has evolved to have these fighters that not only have this massive figure about them and size, but incredible skill that the lightweights and featherweights have. And no two fighters embody that skill better than Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. They could go across any division. If they were flyweights, they'd be elite fighters. If they were welterweights, they'd be elite fighters. If they were light heavyweights, etc. The fact that these guys are 240 plus pounds with that skill level makes this fight so interesting, being a trilogy fight, the rubber match, biggest rubber match ever in UFC history. This one is an absolute must watch. If you like to tune into the occasional fights every now and then, this is probably the fight that you would want to see.
Awesome. Well, can't wait. I think I found maybe my favorite new hairstyle, Sean O'Malley. Have you seen that dude?
Yes. That was my next note here. That was my next note on that card.
That's the next fight you want to watch for sure.
Yeah. Sean O'Malley v. Marlon Cheeto Vera. These guys, they were supposed to fight, I think, 2 years ago, and Sean O'Stream popped for some banned substance. It was ended up getting retested, or it got put to the side because it just showed up in tainted supplements or something along those lines. But anyways, they are going ahead with that fight that was originally slated for, I think, last year on that same UFC 252 card. Sean O'Malley, major stud. He's a real character. Comes off the Dana White Contender Series as well. He's got rainbow hair. Yeah, he's a character. I think a lot of people think Sean O'Malley will walk over Marlon Vera. However, I think Marlon Vera is by far the biggest challenge he's had yet. And if he does beat Marlon Vera, he will raise incredible stock in his division, the bantamweight division. But if Vera wins, it also raises his stock. I think this is a win-win fight for either of those guys, but definitely the next biggest fight on this card.
Yeah, it looks like Sean O'Malley's undefeated up till this point.
That's right. Yeah. And very decisive fighter. He's a finisher. He finishes everybody, and not quite literally all his fights, but he really has a finishing touch. A lot of fighters don't have that ability to put people out as good as he does, and so that's what makes him exciting. And same with Vera, very similar style as well.
Great. Well, thank you guys for coming on and giving us this great insight into the past fights in July and as well coming up in August. It's been a pleasure, and we'll have to have you on in the next month to review the next fights.
Our pleasure.
Okay,
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you.